Hi, Seth. How are you?
Well, Dr. Wen, how was your vacation?
Uh, what vacation? Yeah, I was working the whole time, but yeah, I mean, I guess it was a little break, but I put my dog down last Sunday, not this last Sunday, but the Sunday before. So
I'm
he's,
sorry.
yeah, he's, he was getting to the point where he was incapable of doing a lot of things. So yeah, so I miss him. Yeah. How was your vacation?
It's New Year's and went to the temple to put offerings for my mother. So,
Oh yeah, that's right. Cambodian New Year. Happy New Year to you.
thank you. Was it they didn't have New Year's festivities because of COVID, so it was interesting.
Oh, so but you were able to go to the temple. That's nice. So did your whole family come with you?
No, it was just my sister, my brother-in-law, and my older sister. We cooked the food and went over to put the offerings.
Okay. Yeah. Fruits and such. Sorry, my dog.
No worries.
So um I miss I miss going to the temple to get food for Thai and Cambodian New Year because usually they sell a lot of food. Did they don't have anything like that this year, you said, right?
Yeah, they didn't have it. Usually Cambodian Year goes for about I think 4 days, and they didn't do any festivities this year. No
Okay.
events, nothing.
But you went to the one in Fontana or the one in San Bernardino?
One in San Bernardino.
Oh, okay.
There's also one in Lake Elsinore. Haven't been to that one yet.
Mm.
Was it
Oh,
do you remember I don't know if he took any of your classes. His name is Bipu Landa. He's a monk. He's usually dressed in his garments when he shows up for class. I don't know if he's took any of your computer classes. I think he might have. No, I think you would have remembered him.
no, I don't think so.
Because he's also a cybersecurity major. So that's why I thought he might
Uh,
have taken some of the classes.
might be in Riverside.
But he's a monk and he helps out with the temple in Lake Elsinore.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I would remember, but I think that might be in like in RCC because RCC has the cybersecurity program too. But yeah, so um, you know, it's been like I didn't even remember that that was New Year because it's just times just flash by so fast. Yeah. In San Diego, they usually have like a very big activity event for that type of thing. So I don't know if they had it this year.
I forgot which park it is. Every single year, the park will just be full for Cambodian New Year's, and we'll just celebrate a couple days, and people just show up there together and just have food.
Yeah.
I haven't been there
It's
in
fun though. They I used to live right near the San Diego one and there's a huge community over there, Laotian, Thai and Cambodians. So they have like a park behind like a market and I would walk down the street and they would sell food and have a lot of different activities there. Hi, Alberto.
yes.
How are you? Yeah. So, but I
Uh,
miss it.
I'm doing okay.
Okay. Oh, you sound tired.
I am. I was awake since 6 and I didn't have breakfast till about an hour ago.
Yeah. It's Lane's here. So we'll wait a couple minutes before we start. We're just talking about Cambodian New Year that just passed. So we're good. So today we're going to move on and we are going to do web services using Flask, um, which is fun and you will see. I wrote the activities and then the lab will expand on it. We will use database with it. So it just give you a little taste. Now, It's not really 100% networking, but I want you to understand how to work with different frameworks, or at least Flask framework today, and be able to incorporate this for maybe web app development or even API, working with API. So if you guys want to check out your Canvas, download the notes and the assignment, and then we'll go through that together. So we'll see who else will be joining us, because, you know, coming back from spring break, people probably forgot we have class. Yeah. So I hope you had fun during spring break. A little bit of relaxed time. Okay. All right. So there are a few of us here now. So I'm going to go ahead and get started because it's 2 p.m. Michelle is joining us now. Hi, Michelle. So as we were just talking about earlier, if you check out your Canvas, let me go into screen share here. And you would find, I'm so trying to wrap up my computer data science stuff. All right. So we are going to cover web services with Python this week. And the book really addresses how to build a program, that actually multiple programs that work with Flask, and to be able to incorporate database, so that way you would have the information of the routers and the switches that would be tied to your web environment. So a big area of the infrastructure would be web services. As you know, that all business have some form of website, and in most current cases, we would have web applications. And so it introduces you to Python and how to use Python with Flask in chapter 9. So we are going to get a little bit of introduction to Flask today. And then for the lab, we will work with database using Alchemy, SQL Alchemy with Flask, so you can have a better understanding on how to at least work with the introduction part of the programming side. This class is not fully integrated for, you know, web app development or anything, but this chapter we will touch on it, so you will know how to use it. And so there's also a homework assignment that's going to help you prepare for the next quiz, which will be released in Unit 10. So if you check that out, and that covers the prior chapters, the chapters that we completed before going to spring break. Okay, so the notes you can find here, and then the assignment that we're going to go over is going to be this. Now, the notes, as I mentioned, it's going to touch on the majority of it is how to use the framework with creating programs for the network environment. In our exercises, we are going to do the basics in using Flask and Python. So I will walk you through that. So just to start, in chapter 9, it starts talking about RESTful web services. But before that, we have to understand what web framework or web application framework would be. And simply, it is a software framework that's designed to support development of web applications, including web services, resources, and APIs. So you see a lot of that being discussed in the chapter itself on how to work with web APIs across the devices, like the routers and the switches with the iOS, and then incorporating that to our web environment, and so that way we can utilize the web services to track our systems. So web framework gives us a way to uniformly work with web applications across, right? So they have to come up with the framework so that way we can build and deploy web applications. applications that you can see from gaming to mobile and how it work across the devices. And in the web frameworks, it's really aimed to automate the common activities, and that's the core component of this class, is to automate a lot of the areas that we have to work with in the network environment. So now we would look at how we would use authentications, we would work with template, how to manage sessions, working with tokens and cookies. And you do see some of that with HTTPie today, and also to be able to understand a little bit more on how to manage the commands for dynamic websites, incorporating with your web servers. Okay. So the next part, it talks about RESTful web services, which uses HTTP. And when you work with HTTP, I don't know if you have taken web development classes before, but just a very brief introduction, you would see that there would be commands that would be known as get, post, put, and delete. And for things like if you are visiting a website, that would be get. If you are filling out a form on a website or you're trying to upload files, that would be post. And then we would use put and delete for the other areas. So these are really predefined on how the communications information is being exchanged across between the client and the server systems. So in most environment, you would see that there would be web servers, and web servers, its job is to service the client requests in different areas. So you might have servers that would be very much for a static web environment where we would have web page, disclose some information about the company, and then you would have dynamic web services where the user through the client system can interact with the server itself to be able to store files, to be able to update their registration information, to make purchase online, etc. So you would see all of these commands being used throughout those type of services. And REST stands for Representational State Transfer, and it's a way to have interoperability between the computer systems. As we mentioned, that there will be client system connecting to your web servers or servers, could be multiple. And so what you would have is a context in how the system would request certain type of information or certain type of service. And what we need to do is we need to really uniformly streamline this process. And so that way it will be automated. And in the background, we have to really track the automation process on how your servers is providing resources to its client, whether it's via an actual URL or through API. Okay. So here it talks about how it would provide resources and to really incorporate version checking for operations, and to really simplify the operation in the management end for technical or IT people. So, and even developers. So in the frameworks, there are many different types, and the book gives you this image. You often hear Django being used with Python. Today, we're going to work with Flask, and then there are other type of frameworks like Tornado, Bottle, etc. So pausing here from the notes, we're going to go to the assignments. And in the assignments, for the first question, it asks you to define a web framework. And for number one, we would say that it is a software that's designed to support development of web applications, including web services, web resources, and web APIs. And you can, if you just Google it, you would find this common definition across, whether they're describing a web framework, or if you're looking at Wikipedia, if you're looking at different websites that give you the definition for web framework. Any questions so far? Now, as we touch on RESTful services, an advantage of a RESTful services to the users would be the ability to hide the internal operations from the user. We don't want the user to really see all the extra activities and the processes that are happening in when they visit the website or when they interact with a certain website. So this allows us to really separate the operation management in the back end compared to what you would see. So the client, the user completely would not be able to see all the interoperational activity that's happening. And you can also find the details of this in the section of REST or RESTful services in the notes. And so if you look at the image itself, or if you visit the website for the hot web frameworks, you would find the top 5. And for many of you that are in programming and development, this might be useful because in this class, we might touch on maybe 1 or 2 type of frameworks. But what you can do is you can explore tutorials and resources online to give yourself better understanding in other type of framework. Like for example, Django is very popular. If you're looking for Python programming type of jobs, you often see that being included in the job description, especially for companies that deal with web development. And then today we will work with Flask. And so other areas you might want to explore because they are commonly used. So it's important to really keep an eye out for the top 5 ranking or the top ranking type of framework. So that way you can, build the skill sets in order to accommodate the type of jobs that require those. Okay. So for the networking area, Flask will probably be enough, but other type of frameworks have additional features that you can incorporate for additional services or other areas that are outside of some of these frameworks, but you often see these. Okay. So coming back to the notes, you can find those here, right? And as I mentioned with the RESTful, you can find that here. Okay, so here it talks about how consolidations of the networking needs and some of the communication area for the devices, okay, using this, and that allows us to automate a lot of the processes within. So the link for Django, you can find that here. And you can look at how to utilize it via their documentation and how to work with databases using Django. So as you know that Python, you can implement SQLite. So SQLite is, or even MySQL or other type of SQL. However, SQL database, because in web applications, we would normally incorporate database so that way we can store records of things. Could be users registration, username and password, account information, or even if you're looking at like web application for online purchasing, like then you would even have a database incorporated. So these are some of the products that will work with Django. And when you look at Flask really is more on the smaller micro framework side. and it works well with these type of applications. And it's really intended to be easy, right? It doesn't mean that it's lacking in any way, but it's really intended to be for the smallest core. So when you're looking at using Flash, you can incorporate extensions, right? Using Decorator with that, @ symbol, and we're going to touch on that today. And that would allow you to include components for your development out of the box. Okay, so let's take a look at the website real quick so you can see. Sorry, okay. So when you take a look at Flask, it begins with giving you some information here. So keep in mind that it is lightweight for web application. And so if you wanted to explore further, so this is the project page, you would go to the documentation. And here is where the user guide is, right? And it talks about what micro means, okay? And also it gives you instructions on how to use it. So like installation, the type of Python versions, the dependencies, how to install it, and how to use the virtual environment. So we're going to touch on this today in our activity, okay? Now, if you wanted to see more example, okay, like for routing using templates, you can go to the quick start and tutorial section, okay? And so there are other areas on how you can incorporate this or learn about it, okay? So this is Flask information. So coming back to our assignment, it asks you to compare, and I'm a little bit wordy on this. I just took this from our notes, but you can summarize it. So, sorry, I have a typo here. That should be a K. It probably autofill that for me. So for Django and Flask, so Django is your high-level Python web framework that's used for rapid development. And this is really allows you to handle the development for web app. It's open source and it allows developers to take application from concept to completion in a rapid time. There's security component for Django in that it allows you to look at different areas that could possibly create vulnerability for your applications. And what we can do is we can apply OWASP with it and to be able to check to see if the application would withstand the security compliance area. Okay, so the bigger scale type of websites, you would see that they would incorporate Django. So if you're looking at cloud environment, you often see this framework being applied. Or even on, on the large, e-commerce type of sites or applications or gaming application sites, you would often see Django being used. And then compare that to Flask. Flask is lightweight. And it's designed to also be able to incorporate development that's quick and easy. It's able to scale for complex applications, even though it's micro. So it talks about using the wrapper and Jinja. We touch on Jinja when we were working with our playbook. Flask. And it doesn't reinforce any dependencies or project layout. It gives you suggestions, however. So you can incorporate templates and the extensions with it. So it really allows you to be flexible in the tools that you use from the libraries. And you do see that there are a lot of different extensions. So we are going to use one of the extension today. And it's well supported by the community. Okay. And you can find this also in the notes. If you wanted to extract that and add that as your answer, that will be fine, or you can summarize it. That's up to you. So here, these are the top 2 common frameworks that you see. Now we're gonna get a little deeper into Flask. And the example, a lot of the screenshot that I took from the text is really geared again toward networking APIs. But you can look at those examples and you can see on how that will be incorporated in, using extensions, how to pull things, importing components from Flask, how to use Decorator. But I will walk you through the process in the next few questions. So this chapter really focuses only on Flask. Okay. And the way that you would install Flask, you can use pip. Now we can, so in the Windows environment, I can simply open up my command prompt. And what I want to do first, before you start installing, you can install it, straight to your home directory. However, okay, what you should do when you work on Flask projects is to create a directory or a folder where you would hold, it would contain, right, different tools that you would need to be able to run it, okay? And with that, what I wanted to show you is that for the activity that we have today, and I mainly write it with Windows OS in mind. So I had created a folder called tests. And in it, what we can do is we can utilize the virtual environment and we can add our Python files inside this folder. So you wanted to keep it all as a package, because if you don't, you're going to have to specify the path in the actual program itself. And when you run Flask, it's going to want to point back to a directory where it would be able to utilize, right, the commands and the instructions and whatever the components that you specify in your program. Okay. So it would be best to really, let's say if you need to build a web app, you would have a folder that would contain possibly other subfolder if you wanted to build out separate packages. However, you would have a directory that would contain all your programming files. And within it, you also wanted to test it using the virtual environment. Okay. And it's important to do that. So what I did is, here is just the general instruction on how to install Flask. And we can do pip install, and pip install would work across, most OS. But let's come back to the user guide information from Flask, the documentation. And if you click on installation, it talks about dependency here, okay? So in the distribution, it would automatically install these dependency, and it talks about what they are. And in the notes, I included those. So if you're implementing this for the interface, or the Python interface applications for servers, that this is the package that you would need. Okay, so there are additional frameworks and template and different things that you can include. Now, this is automatically installed with Flask. Okay, so the author of the book, he actually created, right? He downloaded dependency files and also other optional files that he would use, and he puts it in a folder. And then what he did was he created like a text document of a list of the dependency, and he used that to do the automatic install. Now you can do it that way, or the easier way would be just installing Flask, and then you can choose the option, right? The optional dependency, how you wanted to incorporate these. Okay. So if you wanted to add the optional, you can add them as individual installation on top of Flask. Okay. Now here it talks about the virtual environment. We've seen this before when we work with like pexpect and other type of libraries. So it's recommended that you would use Python 3, and you can use the virtual environment to really build out your program or your script and be able to test it without having major impact on other areas of your system. So here, as you notice that they specify that you should make a directory, okay, like a project directory, like what we talked about. And then after that, you need to navigate or change the directory to that folder, okay? And then once you're in it, then you can start your virtual environment, okay? And that would allow you to be able to run your program, right, in that virtual environment, okay? Now, once you have your virtual environment tied to that particular directory, then what you need to do is you need to activate it in order to use it. Okay, so here it talks about how to use it with Windows. So it gives you like a general understanding on what to do. And then you can do pip install. So installation of Flask, you can tie that installation to that directory, and you would run Flask in that folder, in that project folder. Okay. Now, if you're using IDE, some of the IDE are more friendly with web development, so you can specify, right? Because in IDE, it actually requires you to start a project folder, and then that's where you keep your source code. So some of the IDE, you can set your preference and be able to install Flask with that preference or the setting, the configuration settings, and be able to link it to that particular project folder. So every IDE is a little different. Now, if you're using Tawny, Tawny has its own. So if you're looking at Tawny itself, right, if you wanted to install it directly into the IDE, you can go to tools like what we've done in the past, and then manage packages, and then you can add the packages. Okay, so here, as you notice, that I had installed it, and it tells me where I install it. And so automatically it added these dependencies as it talked about that in the documentation in our notes. Okay, so just keep in mind that when we work with IDE, we have to bring that in. It doesn't automatically see it even when you do a pip install. And just like any of the applications that we work with in the past, you have to tie the environment variable to that directory, otherwise that path, otherwise it's not going to work. Okay, so that's an important area. And I think many people, if they don't know how to set it up, they tend to, not understand why it's this way. So we wanted to make sure that we organize and keep everything together when we run Flask. And if you're using Python 2, it talks about how to work with it using Python 2 here. Okay. All right. So with that said, before we start installing, okay, and you can install if you want. Let's look at number 6. So with this, in this exercise, we will use the virtual environment to run Flask with the Python program. Okay. And if you're using Linux, you can look at the information on Linux on how to work with Flask in Linux. But I wrote this with Windows OS. So first, you can simply create a folder on the desktop. Okay. You can name it anything you want, but the way I wrote the instruction is I wrote it as test. So as you can see here on my desktop, I have a test folder, right? So if you build like an app, you can say app, you know, game app folder or whatever that you wanted to call it. Then after you create that, what you're going to do is you are going to go to command prompt and you're going to change your directory to desktop and test. Okay. So make sure, and in Linux, in terminal, we would do the same thing. We would make a directory. You can do that all straight in command prompt. And if you wanted to know how to, let me go back one step, right? mkdir is another one. So let's say if I do a game app like this, right? That's going to make my folder on the desktop called game app. And then I can change directory to that, right? And then it's going to be in it. But now, since our activity calls for tests, so I want to make sure that I'm in the directory, okay? And then I can start installing Flask and setting up the run to run Flask, okay? So here it tells you to change the directory to the folder that you created. And then we are going to work with the virtual environment. So you're going to do a pi-m venv env. So pi-m. Okay. And so this is going to take about a minute or so to get ready. Okay. Then what it does is it's going to bring you to the interactive environment after you activate it. Okay, any question? So after that, we are going to do a pip install Flask using the Python interactive environment to do that. Okay. Now, if your pip is not up to date, you can do an update on it. I think we've done pip in the past, so many of you already have that. Okay. So after you have installed your Flask and it tells you that all the dependencies, all the packages have been successfully installed, that might take a few minutes, then you are going to write your Python program. Any questions? So the installation might take about a few minutes. It depends on your connection, really, right? And then, so we just have to wait for it to go. I think, let me exit this quick. I might have a syntax here. Yeah. So I had a syntax there, so it just took me to Python there. Okay. So once you have this, then what you want to do is you are going to do an env scripts and activate. So now we are in the virtual environment. Okay, you see that there. We've seen that in the prior lecture as well. Then we can do a pip install Flask. So here is that you would tie it to the folder. So pip3 install Flask. And then you wait for that to go. Okay. So since I already installed it, it tells me that it's already been satisfied. But for yours, it would show little bars and it would say successfully installed. Okay. And we saw that it's dangerous here, right? Click, Jinja, all the dependencies already installed. Any questions so far? Okay. Now, if you're using, you can use any editor. You can use Notepad++, you can use Tawny, you can use your IDE to really write your Python program. Okay. So let me open up mine is a little different in that I had written your instructions and then I renamed my file. So they are two different files. Let me take this over here. So you would then open up your text editor or your IDE, and then you would write your Python script. Okay, so we would start with the import statement. So we would say from Flask, import Flask. And here we are going to construct the object. So our object is going to be app. Okay. And we are going to use Flask. Okay. So this is your class. So that will allow us to construct this object called app. Now, the next one is we are going to use the decorator. And you simply use @ symbol and then your object name, the dot operator, and we are going to use route. So what this is used for, and in the notes it talks about your route URL, all of that, right? So simply this just indicate, right, your URL endpoint. And then we will create a method, or we would define a function. You can name your function anything you want. Okay, as long as it's not keywords, we're fine. So I decided to name mine T program. and then you simply pass name. So from the function, we wanted to return string output. So here is where you would incorporate your HTML formatting inside your string. So we would return, and all I want to do is to make it the first header on that page. And I would enclose that in a single quotation mark. So what happens is, so you can even call this like index or whatever, because normally that would be for your web server, right? It would be the start. What this will do is it's going to allow us to see this is a test when we put in the URL for our web server. And locally, your machine is your web server. That's what we're doing when we're testing this. Okay, so it's going to use the loopback address, the 127.0.0.1, and the port for this is going to be 5000. So after you have written this program, then you are going to go ahead and save it. And we wanted to make it a Python file. Okay. And then what we're going to do next is we are going to run Flask with this, right? So once we run it, we can open up our browser and then put in our loopback address and the port number, and it would show this is a test for the first page. Okay. Any question? Now, if you're using optional dependency, you wanted to bring that in subsequently, okay? Because those are just extension to the actual framework itself. So here, in addition to that, you would have to add, more import statements, and then you would then construct an object, and then to be able to utilize that object with Decorator, and you can specify different areas. So when you look at the example in the notes in the book, you would see that being utilized across when the author wrote the program that's going to incorporate all the APIs for all the devices. So, all right. Any question with this for number 6? So after we wrote our test.py and we would save it to the folder, make sure that it's in that directory. You should take a screen capture of that program. Now, what we want to do is we want to link, right, that program that we wrote, that script, to the environment variable for Flask, right? We have to set it. So in the next one, you're going to go back to command prompt and you're going to do this: set Flask app equal, and then your file name. And make sure it's all capital. Okay. I use test1.py, so, and yours will be test.py or whatever file that you name it. Okay, so that's step G for number 6. And so once we have set the environment variable in the command line, what we're going to do is we are going to run it. So we would do Flask Run. Okay, and you can see that it shows you here that this is going to be your the address. Your local machine is your web server. Now, what if you don't want your local, what if your local machine is not the web server, right? Because normally we would set this up on the actual server itself, right? You can actually specify it in your program, right, which system that is, and you can have multiple. And in the textbook, it shows the chapter, it shows on how he had set up 4 different routers or 4 systems that would, you know, incorporate, that would run Flask. So you can identify the IP and you just have to define it in your program. And I'll show you some of the example for that. Okay. So here it tells me that it's running, okay, at my local machine at this port. And if you wanted to stop it, you just do Control C to quit. But before we quit, we wanted to check that out. So go ahead and open up your browser. You can use any browser. And so I'm going to use Chrome. And I'm going to type in the address HTTP 127, right? .0.0.1, and the port is 5000. Sorry. It's giving me internal server error. T program missing and required positions for name. Let me fix this real quick. So anytime that you edit, so let's stop it real quick. Anytime you edit your file, you have to restart it. Okay, so we're gonna do set app. And as you can see, it tells me the error here. Okay, that's why it's not able to pull the page. So it says that for this line, it's dispatching the request. It's not able to use the method. Okay, so we have to stop it. And then what we have to do is we have to, if we edit our file, you have to set it again, and then you have to run it again. Okay. 1 second, let me fix this real quick. Any question? Okay, I took out the name. I passed a variable that it doesn't recognize, so. And you should see that there. So what we need is we need to take this out. On the next one, you would add the variable there. You'll pass the variable. Okay, so again, anytime we edit our script, right, you have to stop Flask, and then you gotta set it again because you changed the file. So you have to set the environment variable again for Flask, and then you would run it again. Okay. And this is just the manual process and testing. There are other, so you can automate some of that down the line when you're more comfortable with using Flask. So what I did was I edited my file, I resaved it, and then I went back to my command line and I reset it, I rerun it. It will tell me that it's running. okay? And then again, this time I don't have any error because in here it would show me error if there's error. So what I can do is I can open up my browser, put in the IP address and the port number, and I should see this is a test. Question. So no question. All right, let's move forward. So once you have that page open, and it should show this is a test, right? Or the string, whatever string that you incorporate in your program, take a screen capture. And this is what your program should contain. So before we proceed to 7, we have to stop it, right? Because we're going to make some revision to our file. So that way, and then once you make the revision, you would run it again, and it's going to show the modified, right, output or the intended output from the modified file. So now we know that we can definitely create this in HTML, sure, right? But I wanted to show you how you can use Python with framework to be able to show that and actually tie it to the local machine and make that the tested web server. So for number 7, before we proceed, let's go back to our command prompt, and then you're going to hit Control C to quit. Sorry. It's not listening to me. Now, let's close. Okay. So now I stop it from being run. Okay. Stop from running now. So as you notice that when we open up that page, you would see this get, right? And it gives me the timestamp and the systems. So if you have multiple servers, it would log that there. Okay. Then for 7, what we're going to do is we are going to edit our test file. And we are going to, only thing that we're going to change is we're going to pass a variable here. Actually, this is a name holder, but we're going to pass a variable here. So in the decorator, what we're going to do is we are going to put in a placeholder that's going to be name, which is the username. And then in our method, we are going to pass the variable name and we're going to format it. So we are going to display, right? And in this section, in this string right here, we wanted to use the HTML format. So it's still going to be heading 1. And it's going to plug in whatever the user add as the name for in the URL. So if I put HTTP 127.0.0.1, right? with port 5000/Katie, it's going to say hello Katie on the page. So with that, what we're going to do is we are going to modify our test file, right? We're going to put in a placeholder, and notice it's going to follow after the slash. So we're going to do a slash and a name, whatever the user type in as name. And we're going to pass the name variable in our method. We're going to return it. We're going to say hello, right? And it's going to plug in that name, and we're going to format it. Okay. Any questions? So once you edit your file, you're going to go ahead and save it again. And make sure that we put it in the same folder that we created. Okay. Then what you're going to do is you are going to go back. And since if you're using the same file, you just do a Flask run. I use 2 different files, so I have to set it to another file, right? So I'm going to go ahead and do a set, and I'm going to change this to my test file. And then I'm going to run. Okay. So now if we open up our browser, okay, we can retype in our loopback address. Now, if you do that, you're going to get this not found error page, right? Because remember that it's going to require an additional input from the user. So if you don't have any input, it's going to give you this error page. That's okay. What we're going to do is we are going to put in the name, and you can put in anything there. So I can do Casey like this, and it should say hello Casey. If I put in Seth like this, it would say hello Seth, right? It would say hello Michelle. So it's going to look for, right, the name that's going to follow the slash, because if you don't have it, it's going to give you an error page not found, right? So we wanted to put in a name so that way it would show. Any question? Okay, so for 7, what we did was we modified the test.py file, right? The program. What we did was we used a variable called name. And then in our decorator, we would have a placeholder for name. And that's a simple modification. We saved it. We rerun Flask. And then after that, we would open up our browser to look at, right, the output from our script. So at least you got the very basic on how to work with Python and Flask, how to run Flask, right? And so if you want, you can also add in different method, right, to really incorporate the interactivity between the user and the actual site. Okay. So for example, if I wanted the user to submit a form, upload a file, I can add in additional functionality to my program and be able to do that. Okay. And we simply just utilize some of the resources that were provided by the framework itself. So in the lab this week, we are going to use database, right? We're going to use SQL Alchemy with Python and Flask. And then we will be able to build out the very basic, of course, right? Now, if you do take advanced Python programming with me, we will explore more on how we would set up data and to really, tie all of this into a full-blown, development project. And I will touch back on a fall schedule with you before we end the session today to kind of get an idea on your availability and how the course of availability is going to be able to help you finish out your Python certificate from Moreno Valley College. Okay. Any question with 7? So once we're done, remember that you wanted to stop running Flask, and then you would deactivate your environment if you no longer need it. Okay. So you can do that in command prompt. Otherwise, it's going to keep running. But you don't have to do that now because in the next few things, we are going to come back to it. Okay. So this is just for a precaution measure down the line. It's a good practice to deactivate when you don't use it and stop it from running. But you can keep it running as we are going to work with HTTPie. All right, so let's go back to the note here. And the note talks about Flask, and it shows example, right? The packages, notice that the author uses HTTPie, and we'll talk about that. Okay, so for HTTPie client, you can visit the website, right? You can see how that's used. But in the book, what he did was he had it set up in the text file, so it automatically install all the dependencies as he install everything that he need for his network administration purposes. So here is an example of how you would use a website with HTTPie. So the pattern would be you would have flags, the method, right? We talked about get, put, delete, etc. The URL and the item. Okay. So from an interface, the user end, what they can do is they can, click on a button that opens up a form and they can fill out their information and then they click submit. But in the back, what we can do is we can track, the activity based on the pattern, whether it's going to be get request, put request, etc. So in the case if they submit the form, that will be a put, right? If they visit our website, and you saw this earlier when you look at your command prompt after you run Flask, it shows a get request. So what we can do is we can gather, the information that's given to us through HTTPie, and we can be able to put it into, like an information database. Okay. So in a network environment, why would this be important? Well, if you wanted to look for specific things, content, and details or information, what you can do is you can establish this with using this particular tool, and to be able to extract the detail and then put it from as a JSON file and then put it into the database. So here is what he shows in the notes, right? We did a little bit of this. Okay, this first part. And then this, but you can also gather some information and then pull it and then to be able to put it into a database. Okay. So what we're going to do is we are going to take a look at how to use HTTPie in the next question. And you don't have to put everything down, right? I pulled this from their website. So the question 8, it asks you, what is the purpose of HTTPie and how do you install it? Okay. So it's designed for debugging and interaction with API, with HTTP servers, with web services, because it has JSON support. It actually have colorized and formatted terminal output, so that way you can easily use it for debugging purposes. Okay. You can use it for persistent sessions, for authorizations, authentications, tokens. And that's important in the security world, because if you're looking at web applications and how you would audit authenticated sessions, the cookies, things like that, this is a very good area to look into. Okay. Extensions API, it gives you impressive and intuitive syntax. So there are a lot of benefits in using HTTPie. Okay. So now if we look at the installation, we can use Python pip install. And the commands that you see there is just, the first one is just to set up pip setup tools. If you don't have pip setup tools, then you need to upgrade it. Okay. And then you would then install HTTPie. So now I'm going to open up the installation page so you can see. Okay. So here it talks about, it highlights all the things that we touch on as its functionality. Now, if you're installing on Mac OS, make sure that you go to the Mac OS section and you need to use brew and you need to set the port, very similar to the other packages that we worked on. If you're using Linux, I know a few of you are using Linux in this class, then you can use the install command in Linux, and it's different for different releases. So if you're using Debian like Raspberry Pi, you would do apt install HTTPie or Ubuntu. If you're using Fedora, you would do DNF, and CentOS and other release, you would use yum, etc. Right? So here it gives you the instructions on how to work with Linux distributions for the installation of HTTPie. Then for me, I'm using Windows environment. So I simply would do the Python pip install. Okay. And then if you wanted to look further, you can look into the Python versions. Okay, so making sure that we have the compatibility. Now, after you install, you can use the HTTP dash version to your version option to look at the version that you install for HTTPie. And if you wanted to look at examples on how to use it, right? I pulled some of these examples, and you can run it directly inside on this web page itself. And I simply use httpie.io and under documentation. So you can test, you can look at how to use it, right? Like what we talked about, submitting form, that will be a post. You can also, in the case where the user work offline, then we can look at offline and so on. And then for JSON, you can look into the JSON sections, how to use forms, working with HTTP headers. So what will you see when you do the next exercise? You would see headers for HTTP headers. You would see how we would use it to submit forms and how to request something. Okay, so what that would look like in command line once it outputs that. Okay, so going back to number 8, let me pull this up. We talked about its functionality, its benefits, its features. Any question with HTTPie? All right. So for number 9, we will install it, and we would see how we would evaluate the output or evaluate the method that's being displayed, the headers, JSON data, and looking at how we can look at sent requests and submitted forms. So again, we would use the test folder that we created in exercise 6. And we would navigate to that folder in our command line for step B in number 9. We would activate the virtual environment for Python. And once we're there, we are going to install HTTPie. So step E and F on number 9 walks you through on how to install setup tools and HTTPie. And I'm sorry about this double dash deal. Word actually modified it and I forgot to check it. So let me get out of my Flask. Let me close this real quick. Okay, so now I'm still in my virtual environment. I can issue to install. So we can do Python M pip install -- upgrade HTTPie. And since I have done that, it's already been satisfied. So it showed me there for yours. It would show the installation bars that it successfully completed the installations. And that's what you need. Okay. Then we're going to look at the help features. So we would do HTTP -- help, and it's going to give you a lot, but if you don't know where to start, it's always good to look at the help feature on it. Okay. So here, what you see is you would see a lot of the details. So if you're working with SSL, right? With encryption, it uses OpenSSL. And with this, we can also work with hashes, keys, etc. And then for the networking, we can keep things offline and then sync it when they're online. So looking at offline, looking at timeout sessions, etc. So there are a lot of different areas that we can use it to really obtain the details on, the activities that are happening in your web server, like authentication type, your sessions, your cookies, things like that. So for the web administrator or the system administrator, definitely this would be a useful tool. Okay, so you can scroll all the way down to see all the details with the help. So I wanted to show you how you can access that. Then what we're going to look at next is we are going to look at the method headers and JSON data using and looking at your put method. So we simply use HTTP put, and here it tells us that it is a PIE, right, development, and then use put X API token. So the token that we're going to use is going to be 123, and the username is going to be John. Okay. So we're going to do a put. Is it .dev? So what we see here is it's going to give you the details in green, right? So let's look at it. So first, what it tells you is it's going to be the content for the headers, right? Cookie ID. Okay. Now, from an attacker standpoint, is this useful information? Definitely, it's useful information, right? So if they reach your web server, they can use something like this to really look at, analyze the web traffic, analyze the web activities that's happening, right? And be able to attempt different things. So what we wanted to do is we can use this for testing, we can use it for monitoring, we can use it for tracking specific traffic, etc. So it's definitely useful. Okay. So here it even talk about the services and the ports. Okay, because it works with HTTP and HTTPS. So the data, as you notice, this is going to be John, You saw this earlier, so it's going to put it into the HTML placeholder there. And in this case, it's, you know, it's also accepting different type of files, and it's able to accept JSON application. The connecting IP, it tells you that here, this is IP version 6. So that's really the web server information that you're using. And of course, because we're using the HTTPie agent or client, right, it tells you the version of it. So the token that we're using, we issue that within the command itself. That's 123. And the name is going to be John. So it's like, you know, having that user and that access token for that particular session. So when we issue the put, that means that they submit that, right? And where they're submitting it from. So it tells you the origination address, which is your interface IP. Okay, and it would be, if it tells you other things here, then you would want to check the status there. So if you are familiar with network monitoring tools like Wireshark, right? When you open up a packet, when you're looking at that packet for HTTP, you would look at the header, right? The raw information and the trailer, all of the information. So some of that is being disclosed here when you're using HTTPie. Okay, but in this case, we can actually use the different type of HTTP method. Instead of just looking at the packet, we're actually issuing a put command right to the server, and we use a specific identification and the token. Okay. So I want you to look at the user agent information and then put that down. So just kind of be familiar with the type of information that you have in front of you. Then we're going to do a post. Okay. So we would do a post, and we wanted to do hello world. So then you would use the next, go to step I -f post PyDev. Post hello equal world. And if all the syntax is correct, you will get the details. So again, we would get some information, the timestamp, the server, cookie information. Now in the data section, we added, right, world. So it should say hello world. Okay. And then your connection IP, that's your, and then the host, that's your server, pi.dev. That's the site, basically. Okay. And the URL. So from a web development end, right, you can see that this tool can definitely be useful. Now from the security and the networking standpoint, right, because we have to manage and track a lot of the things, this tool is also useful to us. Any question? So I simply just have you look at the get command information after you do this one, just to give you a different feel. So after step I, after you do the post, take a screen capture and then move on to step J, which is you're gonna do a get. So whatever website that you're trying to do that to, whichever your host is gonna be, your web server, that's what's gonna go there, okay? So we're gonna do a verbose on this. And then we are going to, so a get is just like opening that page, right? Okay. So after you do that step for the get, for step J, it tells you, it asks you, what is the output information for get command? See the first line of the output. And here it shows you, we've seen this before when we were running Flask. It's going to do a get HTTP 1.1. And that usually goes into the header of that particular packet. So in order to communicate with the web server, right, we would have to get the information from that web server once it agrees to service the content. Any question? So I took screenshot of it just in case. And so that way I can have a better idea. And then you can always go back and evaluate it a little bit more, looking, looking closely on what each of these really means. So here there's some example in the notes. It talks about how to use Python, creating Python script, using Flask, and then having that work with HTTPie. And you can track on both server and client side. So when you build this, let's say in the case that you see in the book, you have these routers, right? And we wanted to see how the routers are communicated throughout the process for web services. So you can use HTTPie that way to look at the interface, to look at information about the host. Okay. And here you can see that that's used for interface, right? Host name, interface number. And you can use JSONify to extract the data that's given to you by the host, all the green stuff that we got earlier, right? In particular area, and then to be able to incorporate that into a database. And that's what he was doing in the example. Okay, so next we're going to talk about resource for API, and we're going to touch on Alchemy, SQL Alchemy, if you don't have any questions on the last stuff. So SQL Alchemy is an extension. It's a database abstraction, and it allows you to map relational object. Okay, you can build objects straight out of Python script using SQL Alchemy and Flask. Okay, so we would use Flask and SQL Alchemy. We're going to experiment with this in the lab because I try to keep like 10 questions usually, or 12 for your assignments, just for the sake of time. So it would look something like this. Okay, like creating the object and use it for application. So you would need to import Flask, and you would need to also import SQL Alchemy. And so after we do that, just like what we previously done, we create the object called app, kind of like what we did, right, for Flask. And then we would tie in SQL Alchemy, right, and the database. So it works with SQLite, basically. Okay. So here we created the database object, right? And we specify how we construct that object for SQL Alchemy. Then you would then incorporate the modeling of your database, right? How you would want to set up specific areas of your records. Like if you would incorporate strings, how long is going to be your strings? What are some of the keys that you use? Because the way that we set this up is going to be relational. So we would use the primary key in order to pull some of the details like host name and such from our database for query. So then with that, you would have to tie in the class and the methods, the member methods, and the members from that class in order to establish the database itself. So here is where you would add the information into the database. Like in this example, he added the router 1 and 2 information into the database. Okay. And then once you have your script written, you just run it. And then what you can do is you can access the content of that database. And that's what he's doing here. Okay, so let's switch over to our assignments and answer the question. What is the purpose of Flask SQL Alchemy? It is an extension of Flask that adds support for SQL Alchemy to an application. It aims to simplify the use of SQL Alchemy with Flask by providing defaults and extra helpers to make it easier to accomplish common tasks in SQLite. Like adding objects and its attributes, right? And that I'm talking about database objects. Okay. Any question with number 10? So I want to show you the resources for it. Maybe you can look at it and look at some information, the details before we approach the lab on Wednesday. You can look at documentation, and the notes contain some information about SQL Alchemy, Flask SQL Alchemy. So here is the link that I provided. Okay, that's on page 8. And so here it touches on the Python versions, and it works with 2 and 3, and the Flask version and the SQL Alchemy versions. And the answer that I got from number 10 is from the webpage. So you can refer to the user guide, right? And then down further, you can look at, so once you create a database, then you can insert records and modify your records and query it. So it walks you through the process on how to do that. So we can go to the quick start. Okay. So if you want to build the initial database by importing DB object, right, it walks you through the step on how to do that. Okay. The example here. And you saw that in the text too, where he added the session. Okay. Now, if you have specific user, so from a security standpoint, these are the things that we look for right here when we're looking at it, when we're looking at the application source code, right? And how it ties to the database, what kind of user account does it have, valid authentication details. So most common developer would start with your generic users. And in some cases, they don't have authentication, as implementation for a specific group of users, because it could be that they need higher privilege to come back and edit some component in the database, and that's a big no-no. So you can see a little bit further on how you can set up import user accounts, creating for the database itself. So here you have an admin and a guest. Okay. And then you can specify the query for a certain type of user on what they added or how they use the database. Okay. So here it walks you through on how to use it. And it's important to take a look at some of the provided information, because, if you miss certain area, it might not work accordingly. Okay. All right. Like relational database, you can go to simple relationships on how you can establish, right? You can correlate the relationship. So I know that some of you might be interested in data science. I've been working on it for, I don't know, the last few months or so, and even earlier today. Database, right? Data visualization, Python is so crucial in data science. And data science can relate to a lot of different areas, from logistic to cloud to security to, analytics for user, consumer, web access, everything, right? So this would be an area that you wanted to scale out on. That means that you want to build the skills, especially, if you look at security side, we analyze stuff all the time, right? From traffic to threats to vulnerability to, there's a lot of assessment that's involved in security, pulling logs, be able to graph it, to interpret it, to provide statistic analysis on it, etc. Right? And then from the programmer and developer side, tools like this, having knowledge of frameworks and extensions and things like that would definitely be helpful, not just in web development area, but if you wanted to do data analytics, it's definitely useful to have a little bit more knowledge in database, how to work with database, how to program, and how to analyze stuff in using Python. So, and everything that we touch on in this class kind of relate to all of the data science pieces. So that might be something that you would be interested in. Okay. All right. Any questions? All right. So if you go further, the rest of this are some example. And I think some of the pieces that is covered in the rest of the notes, we touch on this with HTTPie exercises that we've done with put and post. We worked with Flask and, using variable and then route information in our decorator. And then we talked about using SQL Alchemy and then to be able to extract JSON information and put it into specific records. Okay, so the rest of the content for the lab, the notes is really about putting it into the application for the networking side. And you can take a look at how the scripts are written, how it's used. So it's very specific for a certain purpose, but you can apply it in other ways. Okay, and that's my point that I want to drive home today. Okay, so check out the notes, even though it's very lengthy. I know it's 20 pages because there's a lot of screen capture. Okay, and then on the last part, he revisit chapter 2, which is when we were using pexpect, right? And then optimizing, that particular script for the purpose of the database, which is pretty cool. I thought that it's a clever way to tie everything together. So you can take a look at how he used that and be able to incorporate all the things that we've been using or from earlier chapters into our web services topics that we talked about today. Okay. All right. So don't forget that we have a homework assignment. And yes, I'm going to answer Michelle's question. So Michelle asked me, will you be teaching both Python classes in the fall on another? Okay. There will be cloud classes being offered next year. So yes, Lee and I worked on cloud administration program, or the certificate, which is only a certificate. It consists of about 5-6 courses. Some of the courses that we already covered, like CIS30B. There are a few new cloud classes. So I just finished the cloud security course. He finished introduction to cloud computing, which is Cloud Plus. I'm working on 2 additional, which is AWS and Azure. That's going to go into the certificate. And then he's working on the cloud entrepreneurship, which is more on consulting area for cloud. And we're going to tie apprenticeship to the cloud administration certificate. So this is a different approach in cloud administration, not just to, but it gives you the foundation in managing cloud to work with, different type of cloud products. And the main ones that we picked were Microsoft and AWS. RCC has the cloud architect, which focuses on AWS. We wanted to have a holistic approach in more on if you have a business, right? If you become an IT consultant or, you know, in specific area of cloud, what would you do? Or how to help people manage their cloud environment. And that's really important for us. So I'm hoping that it's going to get approved by fall of 2022. You never know. This district takes a long time. So yes, we will have cloud administration certificate being available along with IoT administration that I'm finishing. I wrote a few courses in the past. I'm just revamping it and updating it and then tying it to a more valid program certificate base that's going to be state approved. I am teaching advanced Python in the fall. I might be teaching both classes if schedule gets a little hairy because already faculty, some of them don't want to come back on campus. So I might inherit the CIS30B, which is the networking class that was originally assigned to someone else. I love networking, don't get me wrong, but I just have so many new classes that I have to teach. So I have to pick and choose. So if I take that class, I might be only offering one Python. I really want to offer 2 Python courses so you can finish your certificate for most of you. And I wanted to offer it back to back, meaning that you're going to do a 2 to 4 and then a 5 to 7. So that way you can do a one hit in one day and you can knock out 2 classes. So will that be a viable schedule for most of you or all of you? And if not, and it's going to be like what the platform that of learning, it's going to be like this. Now, the dean has asked me to revise the schedule to make it, you know, so I can do a hybrid environment where I can stream so that way some of you that live really far can take the classes, or you can come on campus if you live close by, you can have access to me physically. We can do it that way, Monday and Wednesday, or we can do it, you know, virtually completely like this as an online regular meet. But yes, I'm teaching both classes. That's the plan. Right now I have 5 classes in the books. So one of the networking classes is going to have to go, but I want the students to finish out their certificates in different area of IT. So we have to offer them. Okay, so 40A will likely be offered. That's a Network Plus one. 30D and the security one will likely be offered. So you can finish out your Python certificate. That was my proposed schedule when I sent to the dean. I was going to offer the Microsoft administration course, which is 40C, but likely I have to postpone that class for maybe another time because that will put me into 6 courses and the majority of them are new courses. So that's a lot of work. And my TA would not allow 6 courses for full time. So I would have to keep it as 5. So to answer your question, yes, we would have both classes. And yes, you know, so what do you think? I like your feedback. If you wanted, because I wanted to keep the schedule because most of you can make it. We can do 2 to 4 and then take an hour break for dinner and then come back and do 5 to 7 if you don't have other classes in plan, and you can knock out 2 Python classes at once so you can finish out your certificate if you took the other one too. But would that be okay? Okay, so let's plan on that. I don't think that gen ed classes will run late at night, but in the case if they do hold a session or something, I'm okay with you missing a couple sessions. Or if you wanted to watch recorded video, I'm fine with that. I'm really fighting for this class to be either hybrid or online so that way all of you can take it, because I know some of you are working and some of you are, you know, watching videos after, and some of you are attending physically, so we're trying to make it work. But if there's any changes, I will let you know, because, you know, it's not approved by the dean yet and it still has to go through a person that overlooks the department, which is my chair. I'm only assisting chair, so but I will keep you up to date. Okay. All right.
Oh yeah, sorry. She told me I was muted. Yeah,
Okay.
I was gonna say it sounds good, but yeah, I'd have to make it work as far as hours, and yeah, that would be great if we could do it like online, be able to watch videos or something, because sometimes that
Yeah.
helps a lot.
So yeah, so I plan to stream all my classes regardless, and they said that we could, even though it's a face-to-face class. If they classify as a face-to-face class, I can still use web enhanced tool, meaning Canvas and video and all of that. So if I do use Zoom, it will be in the classroom, and it won't be like this where I'm sitting in front of the computer all the time, because there will be students that's asking to get help and such, right? It's a little bit different. However, I would be able to record my session. And they told us that they're going to get this really cool tool that's going to automatically like focus on us when we walk around the room. So we'll see if that's going to happen. But yeah, so recorded videos are going to be available for you. So the next two classes, one is going to focus on the ethical hacking piece of Python, which is the security one. And then the last one, the F is going to be on, or the E is going to be on advanced, which is on data structure using Python, and working with more of data container and things like that. So it's a little bit more advanced. And that way mostly everybody will finish the certificate. But I also aim to offer other IT related classes so students can progress in those certificate as well. I don't mind teaching all of these classes, to be honest with you. I love it. It's just I'm only capable of teaching so many. And and then the others, they have to teach so many, so we have to divide that up on who's teaching what. But Mr. Lee is going to be, mostly traveling in some part of the in the fall semester. So he had requested to do the C++ class. And so that's what we're going to give him. Okay. And yeah, and I'm still looking to hire more faculty. All right. Anything before we part?
Just
And so,
curious,
yep.
but will they ever offer the IoT one again? I know I didn't take it because I had issues with the Professor Lee's teaching very well.
It's not gonna go for until next year.
Okay.
It's just census is for Python programming because it's so new. It's pretty
Mm-hmm.
low as you see the census in this class. But I do have students that finish out 30A
Mm-hmm.
that might be taking the other classes. So if I have 17 or higher, then I'm able to keep the course. I really fought for this one and the other one to stay alive this semester.
Mm-hmm.
But there's like we have to give and take. So in some cases we have to keep some courses and cancel some of them because we can't keep them all if they're low in census. So yeah, projection, we're probably not going to run the IoT one until probably next year, and that will be a good time because if the IoT certificate is offered, that's one of the course that's required in the IoT
Okay.
administration one.
Okay, that's good. I just hoped I didn't miss out on it because of my own hangups and worries.
And to be honest with you, even though a lot of people have programming skills and stuff like that, they can always teach. And sometimes programmers have different programming experience with different languages. So even when they apply that they know of it, but they can't teach it. So it really depends on, who's capable of doing what. And yeah, I mean, I can teach some of the courses, but how is that going to reflect based on my schedule and availability and all of that? So we have to take those things into consideration. But yeah, so likely another year before IoT Python will be offered again.
Okay, well yeah, I knew that was probably gonna happen, and I took that chance. That's okay.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? Well, Norco, Norco actually opted in recently on this certificate, so they might be
Okay.
offering some of the classes too. So keep an eye out. I don't know how soon they're gonna offer it. So it's most likely it's gonna be another year before they get approved, even though
That's
they
okay.
opt in on it. So by the time that they re-offer some of the courses, so they're gonna start with 30A.
hmm
And so they will likely, and RCC they opt in, but they haven't been offering the courses. But some of these courses, you know, that it's gonna tie to data science
Yeah,
because
it's gonna get popular once I figure it out.
right, and we articulated with UCs on these, so I don't know why it's not in assist yet, but it should be very soon. I gotta remind Jeannie about it. Okay.
Mhm.
All right, we only have a few minutes left. Thank you for attending. Make sure you check out your assignments and your homework for this week, and then we have a quiz next week. So make sure we do the reading and review. Okay, so I'll see you Wednesday, everybody. Bye. Type your name. Thank you.